Ancient Rome, with its storied past and the legendary tales of Roman gladiators, has long captivated the imaginations of various entertainment mediums. These gallant and valiant figures birthed a host of critically acclaimed films, most notably Gladiator by Scott Ridley, which has elevated these mortals to iconic statues. The visceral sensation of stepping into the lion's den, squaring off against fearsome opponents, and narrowly escaping death by a hair's breadth is an experience that has resonated deeply with audiences, brought vividly to life through the silver screen. The success of these films soon spilled over into the gaming world, where developers eagerly sought to replicate the cinematic magic and craft the definitive Gladiator-themed game. Although numerous titles entered development during the early 2000s, only a handful survived the process to reach players. The rest were slain before they could see the light of day, cancelled and forgotten in the annals of gaming history. Today, I'm diving headfirst into the history of one of my all-time favorite games, Gladiator: Sword of Vengeance. I contacted the developers who brought this title to life and had a talk with a die-hard fan to uncover the full story behind its creation. We'll explore its origins, inspirations, behind-the-scenes facts, and much more. Welcome to the untold history of Gladiator: Sword of Vengeance. Deep within the heart of Manchester, England, a studio by the name of Software Creations came to life. Founded by Richard Kay in 1985, the company embarked on its journey with humble beginnings, cutting its teeth on conversions for the Commodore 64 and ZX Spectrum. Early projects included titles like Peter Pack Rat, Mystery of the Nile, and Kinetic, setting the foundation for what would become a notable player in the industry. As the studio grew, so did its ambitions. Software Creations soon found itself signing deals to work on high-profile movie-licensed games, most notably Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade for the NES. The studio also made its mark by porting beloved titles like Bionic Commando and Bubble Bobble, expanding its reputation for quality conversions. With experience under their belt, the team at Software Creations began to explore original game development. Titles like Solstice, Plok, and Equinox emerged, earning praise for their quality and solid gameplay. Yet, even as they ventured into uncharted territory, the studio continued to capitalize on lucrative licensed projects, taking on adaptations of popular brands such as NASCAR and The Simpsons for the Game Boy Color. As the millennium turned, Software Creations found itself at a crossroads. Once a thriving hub of creativity, the studio was now teetering on the edge of financial ruin. Despite the rich history of working on well-received licensed titles, including adaptations of popular franchises like Indiana Jones and The Simpsons, the late 90s were not kind to them. With the gaming landscape shifting rapidly, Software Creations needed a lifeline. In a bid to reclaim their former glory, the team quietly began working on an original IP, aiming to catch the attention of publishers and rekindle their fading spark. But just as their vision began to take shape, fate intervened. In May 2002, Acclaim Entertainment stepped in, acquiring the studio and pulling it back from the brink of bankruptcy. With the acquisition came change, not just in leadership, but in identity. The name Software Creations was retired, and from its ashes emerged Acclaim Manchester. This new beginning marked a pivotal moment in the studio's history, one that would shape its future.
And now, citizens, our wonderful Dragatin reaches its zenith. Applaud our brave hero Invictus Thrax, who nobly approaches his final doom.
Once Acclaim acquired Software Creations, the wheels were set in motion for Gladiator: Sword of Vengeance. However, the origins of this ambitious project carry a fascinating backstory. Initially codenamed Gladiator in its infancy, the concept can be traced back to audio director Chris Jojo. According to lead designer Jim Bottomley, it was Chris who first planted the seeds of the idea. Lead designer Jim Bottomley explained to Evan Halley in an interview the whole story behind the game's inception and how Chris Jojo was involved. The game actually started development before we were bought by Acclaim. Prior to that, we were Software Creations, a studio that had been around since the 80s. Software Creations had recently come under new management in the form of Paul Hibbard, a very forward-looking fella and all-round top block. When Chris approached Paul with the game idea, Paul loved it. Very quickly we put together a concept video that we were hoping to use as a part of a sales pitch to publishers, but before that endeavor had gained any real traction, we were bought out by Acclaim, mutated into Acclaim Manchester, and development on Gladiator was started in earnest. There's more to the story. The origin of the game actually started with our audio director, Chris Jojo. His original vision was to pitch players into this huge, exaggerated gladiator regatta where they would fight to the death. He also wanted to mix in fantasy and have the gods of Rome and Egypt play a role. He went very deeply into research mode and created a mighty tome of document that contained lots of historical data. Chris Jojo brought the foundation on which Gladiator Sword of Vengeance was built, but the developers at the time felt that the concept lacked crucial elements that would make it fun. At this point, Jim Bottomley and Nick Dixon chimed in to provide their expertise and also bring the concept to a playable state. But it was missing a lot of specifics about how the game would actually play. At this time I took on the job of rustling his document and vision into something more gamey, wherein Nick Dixon explains the role he played in the making of Gladiator. The original Gladiator was conceptually similar to the final game, but very heavily story focused with not a great deal of game design present. When I arrived, I put together a short document that reshaped and rescooped the game into a manageable piece of development, which was actually a game.
Where am I?
The project carried the title Gladiator throughout much of its development, until Acclaim decided a rebranding was in order. The parent company proposed a list of alternative names, one of which was even Gladiator: The Empire Strikes Back. However, none of these suggestions resonated with the development team. Dissatisfied with the options provided, the team continued to use Gladiator as the working title until the publisher finally settled on the definitive name, Gladiator Sword of Vengeance. The decision came from Acclaim's hesitance that the name picked up by Acclaim Manchester may not have resonated well with the audience, or that perhaps the name Gladiator, which is closer to Claudius, would have sparked confusion. Nick Dixon, one of the important members behind Gladiator, explained to Evan Halley. The publisher decided to change the name from Gladiator as they felt the audience would not understand what the title meant. We didn't agree given iRobot and Claudius, etc. But nonetheless, it was their call. The title was a bit meh, but was way better than the original suggestion of Gladiator: The Empire Fights Back. Jim Bottomley also explained the reason behind the change. He said Gladiator was Chris' working title for the game. As I recall, we all liked it just fine, but we were thinking about other potential names. Acclaim's marketing department came up with a huge list of potential names, which were mostly pretty bad. I think at one point we said, forget it, let's stick with Gladiator. But I think some form of sunk cost fallacy must have reared its ugly head. Money had been spent, so the name had to change, and Gladiator Sword of Vengeance was chosen, the least bad name from the crop. To make the ultimate Gladiator game, the developers turned to the masters of the genre, drawing inspiration from some of the most iconic films and media of the past. In a conversation with me, Nick Dixon and Jim Bottomley shared that Ridley Scott's Gladiator was a significant influence on the team, shaping the game's atmosphere, narrative flow, and the grand sense of stepping into the shoes of a gladiator. However, Gladiator wasn't the sole muse. Nick Dixon also cited Jason and the Argonauts as a source of inspiration, while Jim Bottomley recalled that many of Ray Harryhausen's legendary works played a pivotal role in shaping Gladiator Sword of Vengeance. Curious about the game's influence behind Gladiator Sword of Vengeance, I reached out to Jim Bottomley to see if he could shed some light on the games that may have inspired its creation. After I posed the question, here's what he shared with me. As for your question about influences, I am a fan of 200's AD Slain, but I don't remember it being much of an influence for Gladiator. I was a huge fan of the N64 Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, and that game influenced some of the decisions we made in the game. Obviously, Chris was initially influenced by the Ridley Scott movie, but that wasn't the case for me. Chris's original concept was rooted more in reality, but I was eager to make it more fantastical, something more akin to a Ray Harryhausen movie, which both Nick and I were great fans of. In a separate conversation about the influences behind Gladiator Sword of Vengeance, Jim Bottomley mentioned that the team were huge fans of Metroidvanias. This appreciation for the genre subtly shaped aspects of the game's design and exploration elements. We were all fans of Metroidvania games, and we were inspired to some extent by them. Acclaim Manchester combined all these elements together to make a game with a compelling story and great gameplay. Set in 106 AD after Emperor Trajan's death, the story of Gladiator Sword of Vengeance unfolds under the brutal reign of Arruntius, a despotic consular who seizes power and declares himself a god. Convinced of his divinity, Arruntius bans the worship of other gods, replacing their statues with his own to ensure that the people worship him alone. To amuse himself and solidify his control, he creates the world's most gruesome gladiatorial contest, hoping the bloodshed will win the people's favor. Amidst the chaos, a courageous figure emerges to challenge the tyranny. Invictus Drax, a former slave and loyal servant of Trajan, is an undefeated gladiator whose strength has never been matched, until he is treacherously backstabbed by Arruntius and sent to the afterlife.
A champion is needed. One who by heroic deed will restore the glory of Rome and the gods.
I owe Arruntius a debt I am keen to repay. Very well. What must I do?
Acclaim Manchester planned to inject more into Gladiator, but time proved a mighty adversary. A lot of content never made it into the final version of Gladiator Sword of Vengeance. After reaching out to Nick Dixon, I learned that several planned levels were ultimately scrapped, including one particularly intriguing maze level. In this sequence, Drax would find himself trapped in a massive labyrinth, stripped of his weapons and pursued by a relentless Minotaur. To survive, players had to rely on their wits, navigating the maze to reclaim Drax's stolen weapons. In an unexpected twist, just as players believed they had outmaneuvered the Minotaur, they would face an even larger and more formidable one in a climatic battle. Unfortunately, this ambitious level never saw the light of day. Another interesting piece of cut content emerged from my conversation with Jim Bottomley. He revealed that the developers had been working on a 4-player co-op mod before Acclaim ultimately scrapped the idea due to a shortage of internal QA testers. The concept was simple, yet thrilling. 4 versions of Drax battling out in an arena, with the last gladiator standing declared the winner. This mod could have added an exciting multiplayer dimension to the game, but it was left on the cutting room floor. Further trivia that everyone might find intriguing is that the developers initially planned a semi-Metroidvania mechanic. Similar to the prologue in God of War 2, the idea was to grant players access to all of Track's powers, magic, and weapons early on, only to strip them away later, forcing players to regain their abilities as they progressed. Unfortunately, this concept was also scrapped. Continuing with the cut content, Ivan Halley mentioned a planned guarding system for tracks. Unlike the final game, where players must dodge attacks from all directions, the original design included a more intricate guarding ability, allowing tracks to block and parry enemies' tracks. However, this mechanic was ultimately abandoned in favor of the existent dodge system. Lastly, one particular enemy never made it into the game, the Egyptian Gladiatrix. I only became aware of this character after completing the game for the third time and noticing her appearance in the ending credits. This led me to wonder, despite searching for more information, I couldn't uncover significant details about why this character was omitted. Jim Bottomley speculated that her exclusion might have been due to a combination of time constraints, balancing issues, or narrative cohesion, but no definitive reason was provided. So there you have it. These are just some of the pieces of removed content from Gladiator Sword of Vengeance that I am aware of. It's fascinating to consider what the game might have been had these elements been included, and it adds another layer to the history of this cult classic. After 18 months into development, Gladiator Sword of Vengeance would finally be released onto the PS2, Xbox, and Windows PC. The game was originally planned to be released in late September of 2003, but due to crunch, the release date was pushed up to November in North American territories and December in Europe. A GameCube release was reportedly planned to ship alongside the console versions. Unfortunately, that version was canned because of the publisher. Germany, on the other hand, received two releases, one that was censored and another that wasn't. The censored release that bore the name Gladiator Schwert der Rache differed significantly from the original release. Critical reception of Gladiator Sword of Vengeance was positive, with huge media conglomerates like IGN giving it an 8, GameSpot a 7, and Maxim 4 stars, while other media outlets didn't appreciate it that much. As for how Gladiator Sword of Vengeance did in terms of sales, the exact numbers remain elusive. However, after doing some digging, I came across an article by Nick Dixon. Within this piece, there is a brief but insightful segment where Nick mentions Gladiator's performance. Gladiator was tough and didn't get the full support of the American publisher over the US titles. Nonetheless, it was a hit for the company and generally reviewed and sold well. Of course, after reading such a statement, anyone would naturally ask the universal question, were there plans for a sequel? That's exactly what I asked Nick Dixon and Jim Bottomley. Here's what Nick Dixon had to say. Yes, I think there would have been plans, but I honestly don't think we'd discussed anything except vague ideas. On the other hand, Jim Bottomley had this to say. We were all pretty burned out after the release of Gladiator, so there were no serious plans for a sequel. I think Nick Dixon may have had some ideas, but we'd all done so much over time in Crash that, to be honest, we wanted nothing more than to see the back of it, even though we were all very proud of what we'd managed to achieve in the time we had available to us. In the 4-year stretch from 2000 to 2004, Acclaim Entertainment faced a tumultuous period that marked the nadir of its corporate history. The company, once a significant player in the gaming industry, struggled with a series of high-profile failures. Vex floundered despite its promising concept. Alias was lost in the sea of movie tie-in games, and Shadow Man's Second Coming failed to meet expectations. The string of setbacks culminated in the company's demise, with Acclaim Entertainment shutting down permanently in August 2004, resulting in widespread layoffs and the end of an era. In a desperate bid to salvage Acclaim's UK operations, Rod Cossens and Barry Giaffrato then Chief Executive Officer and Head of Publishing at Acclaim, announced in September 2004 their intentions to launch a new video game publisher, Acclaim, in collaboration with Europlay Capital Advisors. Their plan was to acquire and revive Acclaim's Manchester and Cheltenham studios, bringing back approximately 160 former employees. Acclaim was anticipated to make its debut on October 11. However, this ambitious plan encountered a significant obstacle when Acclaim's liquidator, Alan Mendelsohn, contested Counson's ownership of the studios. This legal complication left the UK staff in an uncertain and precarious position. In the wake of these developments, John Oldham established Throwback Studios in April 2005, which succeeded Acclaim Studios Manchester and employed 15 of its former staff. Silverback Studios didn't survive for long afterwards. After work on Mad Men was finished, the Vivendi-owned company eventually ceased to exist after Acquisition Blizzard merger in 2008. In a surprising turn of events on July 7, 2006, the Toronto-based company Throwback Entertainment acquired a substantial portfolio of Acclaim properties, including Gladiator Sword of Vengeance. Despite the acquisition, Throwback Entertainment remained silent on their plans for these titles until nearly a decade later. It wasn't until the 2015 Microsoft Ignite conference that they announced Gladiator would be making a comeback on Xbox One and Windows stores, eventually bringing the game to Steam as well. It is unclear if Throwback Entertainment has any plans to reunite Chris Jojo, Jim Bottomley, Nick Dixon, and the original team to produce a sequel. Gladiator Sword of Vengeance may seem forgotten by many, but it actually has a cult following. If it didn't, this video wouldn't have been made. The odds of this game ever seeing a sequel may be slim, but should that day ever come, it would be an incredible moment.